the upper middle classes. And when people know that you're a member of the upper middle classes, doors open for you that would never open otherwise. In other words, they believe that this is the way and this is the thing that will get you what you want and what you need. So therefore it becomes a type of God. Right? Becomes a type of God. Because people put their faith in it and their trust in it and their hope in it. And they imagine that these are the things that will make them successful in life. And of course, like any God that people worship, if you ask Hindus or Buddhists or any people who worship idols, they will tell you stories about how they prayed to their God and this thing happened and how they offered things to that God and the God drank from the, Ganesh drinking milk. Do you remember that when Ganesh all around the world started drinking milk? Yeah? All those miracles. And you must have heard of the Virgin Mary crying and, and the crucified Jesus dripping with blood. You must have heard about all of these things. Right? So all of these things, they say these are the miracles and these show that our gods are real. And it's the same. It's the same with belonging to the upper middle class. People say, well, our experience tells us that, and it's true. In some cases, it's true that you will get a job just by virtue of what school you went to. There are certain newspapers in this country. And this is very telling, by the way. If you think about the whole idea of so-called the free press and free speech that they talk about, no. The people who write for newspapers are a very carefully selected bunch of people, by and large, who belong to a particular elite, who have most of them studied in a particular group of schools, and who conform to a particular way of thinking about how the world should be. So it's very important to understand this. People have gods. Everybody has a god. Most people have many gods. So the real question we need to be asking today is not, is there a God? But rather, because the answer to that simply is, there are millions of gods. Countless millions of gods. But actually the real question is, out of all the things that people worship, and put their faith in and put their trust in, are any of these things truly worthy of it? In other words, are they really capable of giving people what they want and what they need? And so what I'm going to do today is I am going to use the Quran to analyze all the different things that people worship. Now you may say, okay, could we have a cup of coffee now, because it's going to be quite a long time to go through the millions and millions of... Of course I'm not going to go through every individual god that people worship or have worshipped. Of course not. But what we can do is we can divide these gods into broad categories. We can categorize them. And this is what we can see the Quran does. The Quran uses certain examples, God uses certain examples in the Quran to identify certain types of religion, certain types of worship, certain types of gods, and then the Quran shows us why these things are not worthy of worship. And what method does the Quran use? It's very beautiful. The Quran really appeals to something that all human beings have it. Now, not every human being is a philosopher or has the capability of being a philosopher. Not every human being is a theologian, and nor are they all capable of being a theologian. Not every human being is capable of becoming a mystic and an ascetic in order to become enlightened with spiritual truths, because most human beings have to just get on with their life in order to survive. Buddhism, for example, if you look at the teachings of Buddha and you look at the life of Buddha, Buddha teaches that in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to abandon the world and live in a monastery. Now, if everybody abandoned the world and lived in a monastery, the people even in the monastery would have no way to live. So it's not a very inclusive type of religion. Although some Buddhist countries have sort of worked out a rota that everyone spends a couple of years in the monastery. You know, like you have military service, they have a couple of years in the monastery. But it's not really, that's not what enlightenment really is supposed to be about. However, so what we find is that these are not really practical solutions. If you want to appeal to someone, how can we know the truth from the falsehood? You can't expect everybody to be a philosopher, a theologian, a mystic, or whatever. So we find that the Quran, which is a book for everybody, it's a book for the philosopher, the theologian, the mystic, and the ordinary people. Because this is a book that we believe that is from the creator of ordinary people, which appeals to ordinary people. And so we're not really concerned whether these arguments impress the philosophers or the theologians or the mystics. Because at the end of the day, the Quran appeals to something that is common to humanity. And what is common to humanity? Actually, something we call common sense. Not logic, because logic is a systemized way of thinking. So we don't want to call it logic. We could call it reason. But even reason is not necessarily what we're talking about. What we are talking about is something even more fundamental, and that is common sense. And common sense is called common sense because it's common. Every single human being agrees about those things. There are certain things that every human being agrees about. The only people who don't agree with it are people who are either insane, and that's why we call them insane, yeah, or perhaps philosophers. I'm not suggesting that philosophers are insane, or some people might, but but they don't agree with these things because they're just, contentious. They think it's their job to argue about everything. But otherwise, no, these are things that people all... Let me give you an example. Isn't it a universal truth that every human being agrees about that part of something is less than the whole? Yeah? A part of something is less than the whole of that thing. True? Isn't that a universal truth? So there's an example of a universal type of truth. Let me give you another example of a universal truth. You don't get something coming from nothing. True or not? Do you get something just spontaneously coming from nothing? Have you ever, in the totality of human experience, heard of something spontaneously appearing out of nothing? No. That goes against common sense. I mean, okay, we've all seen a magician pull rabbits out of hats and stuff like that, but we know it's a trick. We know he's not really doing, we go, ooh, because he's made us believe for a moment that he's done something impossible, because our common sense and our common experience tells us that that's not possible. But we do know that you can't get something from nothing. We know it's a trick. Right? Okay. So we have these types of things, and we could list other ones. You could argue about something, but other ones that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And so on and so forth. There are collective things that are common experiences of human beings. That wherever we are, as long as we call ourselves human, we experience these things and we can agree about these things. Yes? Now I want to make an important point. This is very important. One of the things that human beings actually don't agree about a lot are things to do with ethics and morals. In fact, one of the things that is extraordinarily diverse amongst human beings are things to do with ethics and morality. How we should behave, the things that we shouldn't and shouldn't do, the type of punishments that we should have. Okay? So for one society to say, oh, this society is backward and primitive, or this religion is wrong because it practices polygamy, whereas the right way to behave is monogamy, right? Actually, this is not a valid means through which and by which to judge anyone or anything. Because upon what basis is monogamy right and polygamy wrong? Having one wife only became the normal mode of behavior, to tell you the truth, in the Northern Hemisphere. And these were only based upon survival strategies in cold countries. It was just a lot easier to survive as human beings in cold countries with one wife and a few children. So the idea of just having a few kids and having one wife and a few kids was actually something that became established as part of the culture in this part of the world, mostly due to geography and climates, not to do with any moral superiority. And because it's more moral, it's just about that it was easier to survive like that. But due to the conditions in hot countries, okay, the survival strategies employed there were very, very different. So it is fallacious to say that we should make judgments about another culture or another religion based upon some aspects of their morality. And I'm not saying this absolutely, because actually there are some things that are very common. Human beings universally almost always agree that it's wrong to murder, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to cheat, it's wrong to lie, so on and so forth. I mean, these things are pretty universally agreed upon. But, you know, apart from some basic moral structures, actually human beings have pretty diverse ideas about what should be the norms of a society. And I'm only saying that because you know what? What you will find is that most people who criticize Islam don't criticize Islam on the basis of the fundamentals of what our religion teaches. And the reason simply is, as I hope by the end of today I will show you, is that the fundamentals of what Islam teaches are so firmly rooted in reason and common sense that it is really virtually impossible to produce any type of effective argument against it. So therefore, the only manner or means in which they can try and make some capital out of criticizing Islam is about some aspects of its morality. But it's a false way to make a criticism, because it's not really a valid means. It's not based upon universal principles. So let's go back. Let's use our common sense and let's look at some of the stories and the examples that the Quran uses, and just let's see how very much based upon common sense these things are. So let's take the first category of people. The first category of people are those people who, and these are very few by the way, historically, even until today, the amount of people who actually say, I believe there is not a God, that there is not a creator, that there is no being that has brought this universe into existence, that it's just a product of random events or whatever.